Hi folks. Today now, what I thought I'd talk about was another impact that the failed Jacobite rebellion of 1745 had on Scotland, was that there was a spike in people emigrating to the New World of America and Canada. However, I think it's important to put this into some form of context, and you'll often hear me talking about this because I think that's one of the most important things about history and history lessons. So, to put this into a form of context, emigration from Scotland, from both the lowlands and from the highlands to the New World, had been taking place for some time before the Jacobite rebellions. And whilst there was a modest rise after both the 1715 and the 1745 rebellions, this was really as nothing compared to the numbers who left towards the end of the 1700s, the end of the 18th century, long after the rebellions had been forgotten. Another point I think worth clarifying is that as well as voluntary emigration, what's often stated is that after the Jacobite rebellion, many Highlanders were forcibly deported to British colonies. And whilst this did happen, the numbers concerned were fairly small, only really in the hundreds. So for example, after the Battle of Culloden, there were 3,500 Jacobite prisoners in government hands, but only 610 were actually deported to the British colonies of the West Indies and the British American colonies. However, we're talking about immigration here. There were a couple of other factors that influenced immigration from Scotland to the New World in a much greater manner during that period of the 1700s, and certainly towards the end of the 1700s. So one of them was the ongoing war between the British and the French in North America. So you may remember we talked about that before. And then subsequently the American War of Independence. So the fact was that both of these conflicts, fairly large conflicts, deterred or absolutely prevented Scots from emigrating. But for example, in the period 1768 to 1775, so that's when the war with France in North America was over, had been resolved, and before the American War of Independence began. So it's a brief period of peace in North America. During that period, it is estimated that 25,000 Scots left their homeland for a better life in the New World. Another factor that is felt to have influenced immigration quite greatly actually was the Highland regiments who were fighting at that time in North America. And we talked in my last video about the rise of these regiments, and in particular the Fraser Highlanders. So if we look at the Fraser Highlanders, when they were disbanded, they were disbanded in December 1763 in Quebec, after the conclusion of the war with France. That's now over, so the regiment was no longer needed. Many of the Highlanders in that famous regiment chose to stay and make their home there, accepting very generous land grants that were given them by the British government. And it's felt, and I think this must be very relevant, that all the letters sent home to Scotland from these men influenced, who now established in what would become Canada, influenced many others to come and join them in this brave new world that the Highlanders were experiencing. Just a little historical note of interest here that you might quite like. Quite a number of the Fraser Highlanders who stayed married into local French-speaking families, and many of the Frasers who now form an important part of the population of Canada claim a descent directly from those Fraser Highlanders who had been recruited in Inverness all those years ago. So it would be interesting to think, would you not, that if you had been a young lady in Quebec in 1763, there could have been a chance that you could have had a Fraser Highlander as a husband. Anyway, that's an aside. Now, coming back to the people who have emigrated, especially the Highlanders, overwhelmingly, the Highlanders who had emigrated to the American colonies supported the British Crown in the American War of Independence. And this was the case even with former Jacobites, who obviously preferred a king, any king, rather than republicanism. So what the impact of this was that after the creation of the United States of America, many Highlanders chose to move to Canada, especially to areas such as Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and the upper reaches of Canada. And it's estimated that 15,000 Scots left the United States at that time to resettle in Canada. And you may remember my video recently about Flora MacDonald, how she and her husband left North Carolina at that time and moved to Nova Scotia. So that was another effect, if you can understand, of immigration, almost a double immigration, as it were. However, after the 7-Year War with France is finished, and then when the American War of Independence is finished, at last, at that period, there's no more wars taking place in North America. So after the American War of Independence is finished, immigration from Scotland increased again. But Canada now had become quite a favourite destination for Scots, and particularly, especially with Highlanders, because Highland traditions had now had been established and become very strong in certain areas. Also, that there was a pent-up demand in Scotland now for immigration, because families had been unable to move to North America because of the American War of Independence. But now the floodgates, as it were, sort of opened, and numbers increased quite dramatically. And in fact, they increased to such an extent that some landowners and clan chiefs became concerned about the exodus of their workers, of their workforce, and tried to deter them. This was highlighted in 1786 when the Earl of Breadalbane was openly criticised by Robert Burns, the famous Scottish poet. So publicly, Burns rebuked him by writing a poem, actually, because the Earl of Breadalbane had attempted to stop 500 MacDonalds of Glengarry emigrating to Canada. So, coming back to how we started, the main reason that Scots emigrated, actually, in this whole period we're talking about, which is the 1700s, the main reason for Scots emigrating was the usual one, actually. It was to make a better life for themselves and for their families. And in this, they often succeeded very well, because generally the Scots immigrants, as they would be called when they arrived, were hardworking, they were adaptive, and often quite entrepreneurial. Many of them made great successes of their new lives in their adoptive countries, and in so doing enriched the cultural, political and economical and commercial life of these emerging nations. Over the centuries, this has led to Scots Americans and Scots Canadians being renowned for the roles they played in those early days in the development of North America, of Canada and United States in North America. So today it is estimated that up to 25 million people in the United States and about 5 million in Canada claim descent from Scots. And I think the high number of clan societies and Highland festivals and Scottish associations in these countries bears testament to such a proud heritage being passed down over those centuries, from those original immigrants who bravely left the shores of Scotland to sail for a better life in the New World. There we are. I hope, as always, it's always my great hope that you've enjoyed this little historical insight. If you have, please, if you would like to like it, that would be lovely, and perhaps share it with your friends so that they could enjoy it as well. Also, as you know, please, I love reading your comments, so if you'd like to comment on it or any aspects of the video, please do so. I try my very best to answer all the comments. If you ever want to view my videos again, or look at other ones in my library of videos, they are of course all available to you on my YouTube channel, which is called Gordon Scotland. I hope, as ever during these difficult times, that you are all keeping safe and well. Please continue to do so. But until we all meet again, as we will one day, I would just like to wish you again all the very best from Scotland.